is one of the world's largest third-party logistics and freight forwarding companies, and I have the pleasure, as I said, of being the CIO. Just to establish my IT prowess, we have about 26,000 network-attached devices across just about every country in the world. And to establish my HR prowess, which I'll come on to in a minute, we employ about 53,000 people across the world. And I'm here today to talk to you about a concern I have, unfortunately not an idea. So I was invited here to talk about a concern, not an idea. And I'd like to share that with you under three broad headings. First of all, my 21st century CIO dilemma, my 5 CIO do-wells, and last but not least, what I think makes a good functional leader. And just a show of hands, please, how many CIOs in the audience or aspirant CIOs? Oh, I'd expected more, but hopefully this will have relevance to everybody in the room. Now, if you knew me well, I'm quite a shy individual. I lack confidence, and I'm naturally insecure. I'm like probably many of the CIOs in the room. And way back in about 2001, just after I'd become the CIO of my last company, somebody hit me with a particularly salient fact that added to my insecurity. And she said to me, she was the head of HR at the time, she said, "Peter, you know one thing, at the beginning of the 20th century, 100 years before, large companies in the world at the board had people called a director of electricity. Somebody at the board table who was responsible for electricity. And in the 100 years that ensued, clearly that role became redundant as utility services were provided. And she likened that, obviously, to the role of the CIO. And that added to my insecurity, as well as to the fact that, unlike many of my peers in the UK at the time, whilst I didn't aspire to be in the executive board, I was already there. I was concerned as to how long my job was going to last at the top table, because I felt that my position was less well understood than many of my others, particularly the finance and the HR director. So what I decided to do was I established what I called my 5 CIO do-wells. These were the things that if I could just do these things reasonably well, then I would remain secure and I'd keep my job and hopefully I would prosper. And I'm going to go through them, the 5 points like the last speaker. I'll list them. Unfortunately, I don't have slides. So the first one I had was what we always need to have is a business-driven and well-understood IT strategy. Business-driven because I thought the connection with the business was important, and well-understood because if people didn't understand it, they were hardly going to fund it. My second point, a clear organization that's capable of change and project management. As the engine of change often in an enterprise, I think it's important that the IT community have strength in change and project management. I also thought that to help us be more understood and to preserve my tenure, what we needed was a well-defined and tracked functional CSFs and KPIs at both an operation and tactical level. When I looked across my other functional peers, particularly in the HR and finance area, I saw a lack of data that made me feel or understand whether or not they were doing a good or bad or an efficient or inefficient job. I also thought that we needed a well-articulated IT operating model, consistent processes, and processes for talent acquisition and sourcing, talent management, and other talent-related processes. I felt that ours is a people side of the organization, and we needed to make sure we understood where we were from a talent perspective and where we needed to go. And last but not least, of my 5 CIO do-wells, I thought excellent working relationships with my functional and P&L peers was absolutely vital. So I set off, this was probably 2002, 2003, on my journey to prove my worth to the organization and hopefully sustain my position. But at all times, I was very, very critical of the other people, the guy who headed up quality, the person who was the CFO, and indeed the person who likened my role to the electricity director, the head of HR at the time. And I found my way into my current organization, CEVA Logistics. And once again, I have my 5 CIO do-wells, I established those, and off I went to try and make a mark in CEVA. Something very, very interesting happened. In 2009, in March 2009, as a result of some changes in our executive board, I was asked to take on the role as global head of HR. You remember at the beginning I told you we employ 53,000 people worldwide, so it's not an insignificant task. But of course, I'm an IT person. What do I know about HR? Because surely, to be the head of a function, your primary capability is your ability to represent what happens within that function. And I said yes before I'd even thought about the implications of the job, because I was also the CIO and the head of HR. I had 2 jobs in our executive board. And perhaps 3 or 4 weeks into the job, when it all sank in, I had 2 or 3 very sleepless nights trying to work out, so how am I going to do this? I actually don't know what I'm doing and what's important and what isn't. And interestingly, when I dusted off my CIO do-wells, I realized that those 5 things, and I'm going to read them to you again, are as relevant in any function as they are in an IT function. So, if you're the head of HR, you need to have a business-driven and well-articulated and understood HR strategy. If you're the head of HR, you need to have a clear organization that's focused upon change and project management. If you're the head of HR, you need to have well-defined and tracked functional CSFs and KPIs at both an operational and a tactical level. If you're the head of HR, you need to have a well-articulated operating model, consistent processes, and good talent management and acquisition approaches. And last but not least, if you're the head of HR, you need to have excellent working relationships with your functional and your P&L peers, especially with the CIO. The point I'm trying to make to those of you who are CIOs and those of you who are aspirant CIOs is that your perhaps more structured and rigorous approach to doing your jobs in the IT environment would stand you in good stead if one day you're asked to step out of your comfort zone and look across into one of the other functional areas. And I think that it's those strengths that make us very, very valuable across our organization. So what makes a good functional leader? Is it professional experience? Do you need to be a great accountant to be a CFO? Do you need to be a great personnel admin person or a great business development person? Or is it perhaps some of those more esoteric attributes of leadership and some of the more direct things that I refer to in my functional do-wells that would ensure your success? From my experience, and thankfully, I no longer have 2 jobs in executive board. I did such a great job that somebody else heads up HR nowadays. I did it for about 15 months, but it got a little bit too much for me, and an organization of our size needs to have its own head of HR. But I have learned a lot. I've learned perhaps that relying on what I thought was my professional experience isn't what makes me good at what I do. And perhaps my ability to run a function is a skill set that's more important to me than my ability to run IT. Interestingly, since giving up the HR role, I've also now picked up responsibility for the company's PMO, which I think is a responsibility that many CIOs are picking up these days. So I'm ahead of time. Just in summarizing my experience, my 21st CIO dilemma, which was born out of insecurity and a belief that I wasn't going to make it to the end of the first decade of our century, led to me defining for myself what I thought the do-wells were for me in my role. And ultimately, only when tested was I then able to leverage that experience, use it, and prove to myself that my value to the organization is really not as an IT professional, but it's as a functional professional. Thanks.